In this video, we're going to go over factoring trinomials. When you go to factor a trinomial, you're going to have two types that you're going to see. Type 1. Type 1 is where the leading coefficient, the very first number you see in the trinomial, is 1. Remember, when you can't see a number in front of a variable, there is a 1 sitting right here. So this is a type of trinomial that's factored differently than 1, like this. This one has a leading coefficient that's not 1. We're going to go over ones like this, where the leading coefficient is 1. Ones that have a leading coefficient that are not 1, they're factored a little differently. Here's how to factor a trinomial with a leading coefficient of 1. First, check the greatest common factor. That should be your first step always. No matter what type of polynomial you have, you should always check the greatest common factor. Whether it does have a greatest common factor, whether it doesn't have a greatest common factor, to actually factor the trinomial itself, you need to make two sets of parentheses. Whatever variable you're using, you're going to put that in the front, inside the parentheses. Then you're going to put a number in each set of parentheses. Those numbers have to multiply together to give you the number on the end, and they have to add together to give you the number in the middle. So here are your rules. Always check the greatest common factor. If it does or doesn't have a greatest common factor, make two sets of parentheses. Put the variable inside the parentheses in the front, and then you need two numbers that go inside the parentheses. Those two numbers add up to be the middle term and multiply together to give you the last term. Example number 1. Remember, the first thing I need to check is the greatest common factor. So I'll look and see if all three of these terms have something in common. They don't. So my first step is to make two sets of parentheses. The very first thing is I'm going to see what variable I'm using. I'm going to put that variable in the front of the parentheses. Now I need two numbers. Those two numbers have to add up to be 8 and multiply together to give you 16. So I'm going to make a chart, or think about all the numbers that multiply together to give me 16. 1 times 16. 1 times 16. Is there any way I can add or subtract these and get 8? No. Next two numbers that multiply together to give me 16. 2 and 8. Any way I can add or subtract these and get this middle number? No. 3 will not go into 16. Notice I'm just going down the list. When I make this list like this, I'm going to find the numbers because these numbers are going to converge. They're going to get closer and closer together. I start with 1, see if 1 will go into it, 2, 3, 4, 5, so forth and so on. 3 will not go into 16. The next number I try is 4. Will 4 go into 16? Yes. 4 times. Any way I can add or subtract these numbers and get 8? Yes. A positive 4 and a positive 4. I just factored this. So let's try this again. I'm asked to factor this trinomial. The very first thing is I look for a greatest common factor. Does not have a greatest common factor. I need to find two numbers that multiply together to give me this and add together to give me this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a list of numbers that multiply together that give me 8. I'm going to start with 1 and 8. Any way I can add or subtract these and get 6? No. The next number that will go into 8 after 1 is 2. 2 times 4 is 8. Any way I can add or subtract these two numbers and get 6? Yes. So I make my two sets of parentheses. I put my x here in the front because that's the variable I'm using. And now I need to put these two numbers right here inside the parentheses because these two numbers multiply together to give me 8. And then when I add them together, they give me 6. A positive 2 and a positive 4. Let's factor this trinomial. Remember, the first thing I look for is the greatest common factor. Does this have a greatest common factor? No. I make two sets of parentheses. The very first thing I put in the parentheses is an x and an x because that's the variable I'm using. I'm looking for two numbers that go right here. These two numbers have to add up to be -2 and multiply together to give me -3. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to list all the numbers that multiply together to give me 3. And that list is really short, 1 and 3. And before, what I do is there any way I can add or subtract these numbers and get -2? Yes, I can subtract these numbers. If one of them is a +1 and the other one is a -3, and I put those two together, combine them, add them, it's going to give me -2. So let's go through that again. I need two numbers that multiply together to give me -3. If I have a -3 and a +1 and I multiply them together, that's going to give me -3. If I take a +1 and a -3 and add them together, that's going to give me -2. When there are negative numbers in here, it can be a little tricky to figure out what numbers add up to be this one and multiply together to give you this one. That's the reason I say, is there any way I can add or subtract these numbers to get the middle one? When I say add or subtract, I mean put a positive or negative with one of these so that when I combine them together, I get the middle one, and multiply them together, get the one on the end. Next example. I look for the greatest common factor first. All three of these terms don't have anything in common. I make my two sets of parentheses. I put this variable in the front for each one of them. I need to make a list of numbers that multiply together to give me 120. When I make this list, the two numbers I pick, if I can add them or subtract them, they should give me -2. So I make a complete list starting with 1 and 120. Any way I can add or subtract these and get 2? No. 2 will go into 120 60 times. Any way I can add or subtract these and get -2. If I added them together, I would get 62. If I subtracted them, I would get 58. So no way. Will 3 go into 120? Yes, 40 times. Is there any way I can add or subtract these and get -2? If I add them, I get 43. If I subtract them, I get 37. So no. Will 4 go into 120? Yes. Any way I can add or subtract these and get this number in the middle? If I added them, I get 34. If I subtract them, I get 26. So no, those aren't the ones I'm looking for. Will 5 go into 120? 24 times. Any way I can add or subtract these two numbers and get 2. If I add them, I get 29. If I subtract them, I get 19. Not the two numbers I'm looking for. I'm going to keep going until I find my two numbers. 6 will go into 120 20 times. Any way I can add or subtract these and get 2. If I add them, I get 26. If I subtract them, I get 14. Will 7 go into 120? No. Will 8 go into 120? 8 will go into 120 15 times. Is there any way I can add or subtract these and get 2? If I add them together, I get 23. Not what I'm looking for. Will 9 go into 120? No. Will 10 go into 120? 12 times. Is there any way I can add or subtract these two numbers and get 2? Yes. If I subtract them, I get 2. Look what I need to get. I need to get a -2. Anyway, I can put positive and negative signs to get a -2, meaning a +10 and a -12, a -10 and a +12. Which one of these combinations gives me a -2? That would be this combination right here. These are the two numbers I'm looking for. A +10 and a -12. It doesn't matter where I put these two numbers inside the parentheses as long as I have those two numbers in there. Next example. Very first thing you're always supposed to check is the greatest common factor. Do all three terms have something in common? No. I make two sets of parentheses. The first thing I put in the parentheses is an x in each one of them. Now I make a list of numbers that multiply together to give me 6, because I'm looking for two numbers that put right here and right here that multiply together to give me 6, but add together to give me -5. So the first two I want to try is 1 and 6. Is there any way I can add? If I add them, I get 7. If I subtract, I do get 5. I need to get a -5. So the combinations are a +1 and a -6, or a -1 and a +6. Which combination will give me a -5? That will be this combination right here. So I put a +1 and a -6. I have just factored this trinomial. Next example. The very first thing you're supposed to check is the greatest common factor. Guess what? This one has a greatest common factor. 2 is common to each one of these. How do you get what goes inside the parentheses? You divide each one of these by 2. 2x squared divided by 2, you have x squared left over. 6x divided by 2, +3x. And 4 divided by 2 is 2. Now I'm going to factor this trinomial. This greatest common factor stays out here on the outside, and I make two sets of parentheses. I need to find two numbers. Remember, the x goes here and x goes here. I need to find two numbers that add up to be 3 and multiply together to give you 2. When I'm making that list, the only two numbers that multiply together to give you 2 is 1 and 2. And how do I get +3 from these two numbers? A +1 and a +2. This has been factored completely. So once you factor out the greatest common factor, you put it out here on the outside. This trinomial that's left inside, you factor it just like the other ones. First thing I look for when I go to factor a trinomial, greatest common factor. They don't have anything in common. I make two sets of parentheses. I put an x in the front. I need to find two numbers. These two numbers have to add up to be the middle number and multiply together to give me 12. What is this middle number? What number is sitting in front of this x right here? That would be 1. Any way I can add or subtract these two numbers and get 1? No. Any way I can add or subtract these two numbers and get 1? No. Any way I can add or subtract these two numbers and get 1? Yes. I need to get a +1. So my combinations are a +3 and a -4, a -3 and a +4. Which combination is going to get me a +1? That would be this combination right here. A -3 and a +4. So let's factor this next example. First thing I always check is the greatest common factor. Is there a number or letter in common with all three of these? No. I make two sets of parentheses. I put this variable in the front. Now since it says x squared, I'm going to put one x here and one x here. If it had x to the 4th power, I'd put x squared, x squared. Right now, the problems that you're going to see are going to be quadratic, so it's going to have an exponent of 2 right here. I need two numbers. These two numbers have to add up to be -5 and multiply together to give you +4. So let's look at numbers that multiply together to give you 4. 1 and 4. Is there any way I can add or subtract these and get 5? Yes, I can add these together, but look what kind of 5 I need. I need a -5. If both of these numbers are negative and I combine them together, I will get a -5. If I multiply these numbers together, I'm going to get a +4 because a negative times a negative is a positive. So make sure you look at all combinations of positive and negative numbers to get this middle number and this number on the end. This middle number, you have to add them or combine them. To get this number on the end, you have to multiply them. So I'm going to put a -1 and a -4 inside those parentheses. And remember, it doesn't matter where I put these numbers as long as the numbers are inside the parentheses.